Hey everyone, and welcome back to Fresh Set. I'm Kevin, and I am alone today. So much like Sabrina last week, she was on her own. She did part two of our rivalry series. This week, we're going to continue on with the rivalry series. Excuse me. Sabrina's away, and then next week we'll be back to normal. So, as I said, we're going to continue this rivalry series. This week, we're going to kind of do an overview of the Ayrton Senna versus Alain Prost rivalry, which is probably regarded as one of the most fierce, competitive, craziest rivalries in F1. So much so that it was kind of, it was a rivalry that spanned 1985 to about 1993, but there were a few years that were really, really intense. Okay. Between those years of 1985 and 1993, Prost and Senna had won 7 of the 9 World Drivers' Championships, so they pretty much dominated all 7 years, or 9 years, excuse me. With the most intense of those years, like I said, between 1988 and 1990. 2 of those when they were teammates, and one of them after Prost had moved to Ferrari. During those 3 years, they had won, 2 years as teammates, they had won 25 of 32 races. And that car was pretty much unbeatable. And then 1988, 89, and 90, the race title was decided by 2 crashes. Now, we'll get into those at the end, but it's the similarities between the two are pretty insane. During the years at the top of Formula One, both drivers accused both of each other, of dishonorable behaviors, receiving certain preferential treatments, whether it's from the FIA or what was called the FISA at that time, from engine manufacturers, which pretty much determined who you did or didn't drive for, who was the number one driver, because they had so much pull, or even sponsorships and team bosses. Before we get into some of the actual, incidents that happened on track, we'll talk a little bit about the drivers. If you watched the Senna documentary or watched any of his other races or anything on YouTube, you know that Senna was arguably one of the fastest one-lap drivers in F1. He dominated most of qualifying. If he didn't, it was because he made a mistake. But he also was the kind of driver that he wanted to go flat out at all times, even if it wasn't necessary. Even if he was well ahead, he was still going flat out. He didn't want to just beat you, he wanted to dominate you. And sometimes even when he was racing against other people, if he was behind or coming from behind, he would rather crash than give way. Right, a famous quote that he said, and we'll get into it, which race he said that in, but if you are no longer going for a gap that exists, you're no longer a racing driver. So that was kind of his approach. Whereas Alain Prost took a very different approach. He kind of favored strategy and technique over mathematics, which earned him the nickname, the Professor. This might have possibly been fueled by some on-track deaths of fellow drivers and friends, someone like Gilles Villeneuve, who also died. And that kind of, his mantra was to win as slow as possible. So he didn't want to put himself at any risk, but he wanted to win and win on good strategy. Although they did clash on track, and most of what we're going to talk about, well, a lot of what we're going to talk about is some of their on-track clashes, their strengths kind of complemented each other, okay? Because of Senna's single-lap dominance in the sport, Prost essentially conceded all of qualifying to Senna. I mean, he knew he wasn't really going to beat him. He tried, but he wasn't really going to beat him. And he'd rather focus on setting up his car for race day. So much so, and he was so good at it, that Senna actually would tell his engineers, copy whatever Alain's setup was for that race day. In their rise to Formula One, they didn't really they didn't know each other in any of the junior series. Senna and Prost didn't compete in the junior in the junior track, so Prost reached Formula One by winning the French Senior Karting Championship, and then 1979 the European Formula 3 title. And then when Senna was around, Senna won the South American Karting Championship before he moved to England to race in Formula 3, and he won the 1983 British Formula 3 title. Actually, he had a very famous battle with Martin Brundle in Formula 3, 2 of the Formula 3's highly touted prospects who both went on to go into F1. Prost and Senna were highly touted, and both skipped from Formula 3 directly to Formula 1. They didn't go to the Formula 2 series, they just went straight to it. During the 1979 season, Prost was offered a late season Formula 1 edition with McLaren, Brabham, and Ligier, but he declined them, hoping for the right opportunity to make a good first impression. He debuted for McLaren in 1980, and although the team proved to be less competitive, the team proved to be less than competitive than it had in previous years. Senna came close to debuting with a title contender in 1984, but was unlucky in any kind of negotiations or, the fact that title contenders usually had their drivers lined up already. And he ended up with one of the smaller teams, Tolman. Senna salvaged the drive for 1984, but it wasn't without any kind of controversy. In 1983, he was testing for Brabham. I think that's how you say it. The team, the reigning current drivers champion, who was Nelson Piquet. And then, although he impressed Bernie Ecclestone, who was the boss of Brabham at the time, Piquet and Brabham's lead sponsor, Parmalat, which was one of the sponsors also for Piquet as well, just basically told him, you're not taking that guy. Nelson Piquet didn't want anything to do with Senna, especially being a Brazilian driver himself. He wanted to be kind of the one who's the most visible, the country's hero, kind of. He also tested with Williams as a courtesy, but Frank Williams already had his driver liner set up, so that wasn't really going to go anywhere. So from there, he joined Tolman because it set a reasonable release clause of 100,000 pounds. So if he needed to, he could just pay himself to get out of that. When we get to, they had a few on-track battles. There was one famously in Monaco where it was raining, where Alain Prost, I guess, kind of coerced just by his actions the race directors, in red flagging the session early. Senna was catching him. This is before they were teammates, but not a lot had happened. They had some on-track clashes, but it wasn't really anything of consequence. Most of it came from when they were teammates and just great drivers in a fast car. So ahead of the 1988 season, it was understood that Honda wanted to sign either Piquet or Senna. Senna reached out to the McLaren team boss, telling him that if McLaren signed him, that he would try and influence Honda to sway them toward building their engines for McLaren. This was pretty much favorable to Prost. I mean, Prost was always looking for the best engine. He had a habit of going to teams with the best engine or the best outlook. So when he was presented with the option from Dennis, the boss from McLaren, Prost backed Senna, preferring that he would rather have Senna come up, who was new, who was fresh-faced. He thought he would be able to not necessarily control him, but beat him, rather than having the experienced rival Piquet. In a concession to Prost, the two-time world champion, Honda allowed the McLaren to announce that Prost and Senna would compete on equal terms. There wasn't going to be a number one driver. Honda wanted them to say that they were just going to be equal drivers. So with that, McLaren and Honda dominated everything in 1998. They won 15 of 16 races. They took the Constructors' Championship with then a record of 199 points. That was the best that any team had ever done up to that point. And despite a gearbox failure in the season opener, Senna recorded 8 wins and 13 pole positions. Prost had 7 wins and 2 pole positions. Due to the scoring system that rewarded Senna's wins over Prost's consistency, Senna won the Drivers' Championship. So with that, obviously with Senna's 8 wins to Prost's 7, that's where Senna won his first championship. During that whole 1988 season, they generally raced pretty cleanly, but because of their dominance, the only real contenders they had were each other. The other cars were so far behind. And then with that, I mean, because they're the only ones racing each other, the tensions kind of grew to a boiling point in the Portuguese Grand Prix. At this Grand Prix, excuse me, Senna led Prost by 3 points with 4 races left in the season. On lap 2, Prost was about to overtake Senna, and then Senna, out of nowhere, just kind of dangerously swerves over to cut him off, which almost put Prost into the barrier wall at the pit entrance. At one point, the cars were so close that Prost's front wheel was in between his other 2 wheels, Senna's 2 wheels. Either way, Prost didn't give up. He kept going. He overtook Senna into the first corner, and then Prost ended up winning that race, where Senna somehow takes a distant 6th. But either way, that was kind of the first real dust up that they had, where they kind of left a sour taste in Prost's mouth, talking about, he went on in the media to talk about Senna's character and how he was as a racing driver, which didn't sit too well with Ayrton Senna. Over the course of the 1988 season, Alain and Prost started to suspect that Honda was trying to make Senna McLaren's number one driver in violation of that promise that they had to keep to both drivers equally. And it was kind of confirmed by at that point by a head of Honda's R&D department that Honda seemed to favor Senna because he drove with a quote unquote samurai like quality. Then we kind of move into the 1989 season. Now, from this 1989 season, this is where things really start to boil over. Prost had won his third World Drivers' Championship in this season, with Senna not far behind him. And they kind of traded wins back and forth throughout the season. Senna had suffered some mechanical failures in Phoenix, Paul Ricard, which is France, Silverstone, and Monza. Going into the second last race of the season at Suzuka, Prost would win the title unless Senna had won the final two races, which would have given him the championship. We'll get into a little bit more after this, but I'll go into a little bit more of the season itself. After the 1988 season, the 1989 season wasn't much different. Prost still had a deteriorating relationship with Honda. He continues to suspect some kind of unequal treatment from Honda. His suspicions were inflamed when Honda McLaren sent McLaren an engine crate that was marked special for Ayrton. Obviously, that looks a little bit weird that you're giving one special engine crate to one driver. He noted that he only scored 4 pole positions in 1988 and 1989. 2 of these pole positions were at the French Grand Prix, which he thought maybe they're going to throw him a bone so he could win in France, which is his home country. And these suspicions were kind of affirmed by Nigel Mansell and Keke Rosberg, who also had certain ideas about his unfair treatment by Honda. After the Mexico Grand Prix, Prost had publicly called out McLaren and Honda as his car was noticeably less in the straights. They assumed it was about 5 kilometers faster in the straights than Prost's was in qualifying, which is a big difference, obviously. And then things just got even more heated in the team. So Senna accused Prost of getting favorable treatment from his countrymen, and at that time, the president of the FISA, which is the FIA, Jean-Marie Balestre. Prost had previously persuaded Balestre to write to Honda, insisting that Prost receive equal treatment, and publicly speculating that he had a car that had 20 horsepower less than Senna's engine. Prost also accused Senna of reneging on an agreement they had earlier in the year. So they had an agreement at the San Marino Grand Prix. They had finished 1 and 2 in qualifying, and so they had at that time, it was a secret agreement just between the team. Whoever was leading after that first corner was going to just stay in the lead. Nobody was going to fight. You get to race to the first corner. So during the first start, Senna had won the first start and made it into the first corner, the corner first. But after a while, the race was red flag because of Gerhard Berger's Ferrari crash, and so they had to do another standing start. And after this standing start, Prost had ended up winning the restart into that first corner. He was ahead of the corner, but Senna passed him right after that, believing that because he won the first start at the beginning of the race, he should have still stayed in first. Take that as you want. I don't know, but that kind of they both were pretty incensed that neither of them was keeping toward an agreement because of their different viewpoints. This was also kind of made worse because this agreement was leaked to the French media by Alain Prost. And then ahead of the 19 Italian Grand Prix, Prost announced before the end of the season that he was going to be leaving McLaren at the end of the year and joining Ferrari in 1990. Prost ended up going on to win that race after Senna's engine blew up while he was in the lead. And then after receiving his winner's trophy on the podium, Prost took that trophy and he dropped it into the cheering crowd of Ferrari Tifosi, the ones that they all crashed the track. They went to join in the celebration, and he gave them the trophy to his boss's essentially absolute fury and anger, because the policy at McLaren is that the trophies must be handed over to the team in exchange for a replica. They get a replica made and they get to keep that one at home. At that point, Senna had tried to encourage McLaren just to fire Prost immediately, but they weren't going to do that because that would have just screwed up their championship chances at that point. Then we come to Suzuka, the second last race of the season. Like we had said before, Prost had a 16-point lead over Senna pretty comfortably, but so Senna needed to win the last two races of the season to win. So Senna takes pole position in this race with Prost in second. Prost had jumped Senna at the start and was leading into turn one. They go throughout the race, and on lap 46, they come together again. Prost was in the lead, and with just 7 laps from clinching his title in a regular fashion, Senna was desperate to pass. Obviously, his window's closing, and he attempts to make a pass, and as he did, Prost kind of squeezes Senna onto the inside, leaves him no room, and then they crash. Both cars rolled onto the escape road. Prost gets out of the car and walking away, thinking that he had won the title because there's no way that Senna's going to restart. But Senna, not one to give up anywhere, waved over the marshals, helped him give him a little bump start. And then within the rules, he waved over the marshal, to give him a bump start. If he was parked in a dangerous position, that would have been allowed. But Senna, so he re-enters the race. He pitted for a new front wing and ended up winning the race. At that point, they didn't even let Senna go on to the podium. I don't even know if they actually did do the podium ceremonies right away. But Prost had immediately after he had cut back to the garage, goes over to the FIA, the steward's office, and has a talk with them. Because of the unusual circumstances, the race stewards didn't allow Senna to celebrate on the podium, like I said. But following the race, Senna was formally disqualified for illegally re-entering the track and cutting the chicane, ending his title chance. So that's really where, I mean, their friendship already wasn't great. That's where it kind of just evolved into nothingness. Just everybody believed, or a lot of people believed, that Prost knew that as long as he could make Senna retire, he would have won the championship. Senna obviously came out and said that this was the case, that he did it on purpose. He later had to publicly apologize for making those comments and make a signed apology, which later on, once the FIA president was out of there, he kind of disavowed and said, no, I still believe that. And then we get into the 1990 season. In the 1990 season, at that point, because Prost, he always said that he could never race with Senna on the same team anymore. There was no respect there. There was not going to be, he felt, not going to be any clean racing. So it's his first year in the Ferrari car. So it was Prost and Nigel Mansell. Ferrari came within 11 points of the Cup Constructors Championship that year, and Prost finished second in the Drivers' Championship. Again, Prost and Senna were both back and forth throughout that whole season. Senna won the first 3 of 5 races, where Prost had come back and then won the next 3 right after that at Mexico City, Paul Ricard, and Silverstone. Senna eventually pulled ahead, but in the Spanish Grand Prix, a quick pit stop allowed Prost to pass Senna, who eventually retired because of a mechanical failure. And because of this, in the Spanish Grand Prix, this kind of puts everything back to exactly where it was the year before. This year, Senna would win the championship as long as Alain Prost didn't win the next 2 races. So they're kind of exactly the same situation, just different roles. So again, this title fight is going to be decided at Suzuka, the second last race. So in this one, Senna, right off the first turn, Senna drove into Prost in the first turn of the first lap, ending both drivers' races. They both crashed, they were both beached, and clinching the title for Senna. So the exact same thing. And it's been widely speculated that, Senna tried to repeat exactly what Alain Prost did to him. So we have exactly the same thing that happened 2 years in a row, which is absolutely nuts. Did both drivers win by crashing intentionally? I mean, they'll say no. I think if you ask me, I think they probably would. And then this is where you kind of get that quote for after being basically berated in the media by Jackie Stewart, who was a racer, for his reckless endangerment, just reckless style of driving. He says, well, you know what? If you're no longer going for exact gap that exists, you are no longer a racing driver. 91 was one of only two winless seasons of Prost's career. At that point, he was so frustrated, he publicly criticized Ferrari, calling his Ferrari car basically a truck. And at that point, Ferrari just paid a large severance for him to sit out the entire 1992 season. The only real dust up between Prost and Senna in 1981 came at Hockenheim, where Senna ran Prost off the track onto the escape road. After the race, Prost said that, if I'm doing the same thing, I would push him off, basically saying it's his fault. But at that point, Senna had said, everybody knows him by now. He's always complaining. It's either the car, it's the track, it's the circuit. It's never his own fault. So, no love lost still there. In 1993, when we see Senna Prost come back to Formula One, he signs with Williams after that 1 year out. And it was essentially the best car on the grid. In 1992 was Honda's last year in Formula One. And when we get to 93, the car is running a Ford Cosworth engine with 60 fewer horsepower than Prost's Renault Williams engine. And it was really just no chance for a victory there. He had outqualified Senna 15-1 and having 13 of 16 races with a pole position. Due to this lopsided dominance, most of the drama happened before the season. So in 1993, Williams had 2 open seats and no shortage of people who wanted it. Prost wasted no time and began negotiating for that Williams seat at the start of 1992 when he knew he was going to be out for a whole year. Frank Williams signed Prost to a 2-year contract, replacing his current driver, or who would have been his current driver. But after Prost signed with Williams, Senna desperately told Frank Williams that he wanted to drive for free. It didn't matter. He would have driven for nothing. Prost had expected to race along somebody like Nigel Mansell, but as an insurance marker, he negotiated in his clause a clause in his contract which prevented Senna from joining the team while he was at the team. After learning that he had blocked him from Williams, Senna publicly labeled the Frenchman a coward at the 1992 Portuguese Grand Prix. Senna continued needling Prost during the 1993 season. At a rainy Donington, Senna pulled off a miracle drive, overtaking 4 drivers in the first lap. Prost finished 3rd after pitting 7 times, which is the most pit stops in F1. And during that post-race press conference, Prost listed various problems he encountered with the Williams car, and Senna, kind of just giving us some jabs, offered to swap cars with him. So Prost couldn't bring himself to team up with Senna again. At this point, he believed that it would have made him look bad if he was the one that was stopping him from being in a title contending car. So with this, that at the end of the 1993 season, Prost retired from F1 altogether and allowed Williams to sign Senna, and then he said he would never race again. Once they were no longer competitors, the two rivals did begin to mend their relationship. At the 1993 Australian Grand Prix, Senna did end up pulling Prost up onto the top step of the podium after they were both 1 and 2, or 1 and 3 at that day. And then after Prost's retirement, the two drivers spoke probably about once or twice a week, most of those being F1 related issues. On the last day that Senna was ever alive, he did end up having breakfast with Prost, who was a pundit for TF1, which was an F1 French-based F1 TV channel. And he even filmed, a little segment for him on that channel, or for the channel. Although Prost said that he and Senna were not particularly close at the time of his death, looking back, he believed that in time they might have become friends. Prost says that after Senna died, a part of himself has also died. He feels that a part of himself had also died that day because their careers had been so closely linked. Following Senna's death, Prost was a pallbearer at Senna's funeral. However, he was, out of consideration for the rivalry, he was not allowed, or he was ensured that he would not be sitting at the front row. And that's kind of the rivalry between two of the greatest drivers that have ever been in F1. Netflix is having a show, or putting on. Netflix, it does have a show coming out November 29th of this year, a 6-part miniseries on the life and obviously the eventual death of Ayrton Senna. So check that out. That's actually going to be really good. I'm very excited about that. But yeah, that's the rivalry. It's crazy if you actually watch the races, go through. There's F1's YouTube, F1 TV. Check out some of the races or the highlights that they have against each other. I mean, everybody talks about the 2021 clashes between Max and Lewis, which were fantastic, but some of these were even better. But other than that, we're going to get into some news here. Niels Wittich, who's race director, the FIA said that he is moving on to pursue new goals. It seems, however, that he came out and he says, I did not resign. So it seems to be that he was forced out or asked to leave or told he had to leave. But it seems that the FIA are making him the scapegoat for what seems to be a bunch of problems that the FIA has to fix. Hopefully, there's more coming out from that, but right now, that's all we really know. It was announced that this year or next year, there's not going to be, well, they might still do some things, but they are going to use or do all teams reveals at the same time next year. So instead of, they had over 2 weeks, you have car reveals and what they're doing. Now at O2 Arena, they're going to have all 10 teams revealing their 2025 cars, which tickets have already been sold. I know a lot of them went to sponsors, media outlets. Fans can also buy them. Prices are absolutely ridiculous. They've done everything like they do in every other concert now, where somebody buys up a crap ton of things and they're scalping them or reselling them for ridiculous amounts of money. But Ferrari, I believe it was Ferrari, has already come out and said that they are only going to show their livery. They're not going to show car design. That's not anything they're interested in. They're going to do their own car design reveal next year on their own. The FIA has looked into Red Bull's bib trick. So if you remember a couple of weeks ago, we talked about their investigation about changing ride heights while they're in Parc Ferme. The FIA have confirmed that Red Bull's bib trick is allowed under the current regulations. They went to their factory in Milton Keynes. They spoke to workers, engineers, mechanics, how it all works, got a run through of it, saw all the specs and the technical data, and they said it is allowed as long as they're not changing anything under Parc Ferme, but that part itself is allowed, so they won't have to change anything, or they won't be deducted points from previous races or anything like that. He'll be a driver next year. He signed on to be the reserve driver for Ferrari next year, so that was just a little something quick. There was the fear that next week that Williams' car would not be ready, or both Williams' cars would not be ready, or one of two for the Las Vegas GP. They have confirmed that they will be ready. So I'm assuming they've spent a lot of money to get that ready. But speaking of money, and I kind of want to say it, I kind of don't. But Pierre Gasly is the only F1 driver who has not cost his team a single dollar throughout the race season. I think that's the first time it's actually ever happened in F1. He's had no damages, nothing had to be repaired. He's under cost cap, I guess. I don't want to jinx it. It's kind of like saying about a goalie when they have a shutout, that they're getting a shutout and they get scored on in the last minute. So hopefully nothing happens over the next 3 races other than, the whole driver's title fight, which is not really a fight anymore. I think the biggest thing I'm cheering for in the last 3 races is that Pierre Gasly makes it with $0. Just kind of a testament to how well he's driven this year, regardless if he's been slow at the beginning and then better now. So that was just an interesting piece of news. They've changed the date for the Canadian Grand Prix. Usually it's in June in Montreal, but now to align with F1's reduction of their carbon footprint as a sport in general, where they're trying to reduce the amount of travel they have, because traditionally the Canadian one is smack dab in the middle of a bunch of European races. They did announce that they're going to have the European races, I believe, starting in 2026, kind of on a rotating basis. So it's going to be a little more fluid. It's not going to be, well, we have to have, Italy, Netherlands, whatever, in a certain order. They may change they may change the races that they're in. So alternating races. So you might not have, you might have Barcelona one year and Spain another year. Maybe that's why they're doing it. I don't know. But this year, starting in 2026, Montreal is going to be moving to May, which is going to be interesting. I know one of the complaints of Vegas last year is that Vegas at night in November is cold. May in Canada is sometimes very cold. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the first couple of years. And then just a couple of quick driver test things. Carlos Sainz, Ferrari's going to allow Carlos Sainz to leave early so he gets a debut for Williams a little bit earlier than we would have thought. He's going to test for them in their postseason testing in Abu Dhabi shortly after the last race. It's usually that week or the weekend after. So he's going to test for them early. But where we thought we might see Lewis Hamilton do the same thing in a Ferrari, we're going to see him. We're not going to see him. Excuse me. Petronas, who is Mercedes' main sponsor, has said you have end of the year obligations to Petronas and to certain media things that we have to do. So we're not going to be doing Petronas stuff, and we're going to see you in a Ferrari. So the first time we'll see Lewis Hamilton in a Ferrari will likely be February at testing in Spain or Baku, wherever that's going to be. And that's about it. Well, that's not it. Sorry. Damon Hill, Sky Sports pundit for F1, former driver, all around great information on F1, is leaving after 13 years. Why? I don't know. He just said that he's going to be pursuing different opportunities on X, but everything in the comments is why Damon and not Danica. We could talk about that with Sabrina, which is there. It'd be a lot more fun to have that kind of back and forth, but we'll see what happens with that. I don't know if they're going to replace them or if they're just going to continue on with the same great lineup that they already have. But that's pretty much it. That's the news. That was part 3 of our rivalry series. I hope you enjoyed it. If we're wrong about anything, again, put it in the comments. I know you will. We'll be back again next week. We're in Vegas with Sabrina. We do have some fun things planned for that. We did. We will see what happens. But we will be doing possibly some live stuff, or we'll be posting as we're watching. It's also my birthday, so I will not be in a good state that day, but we'll have fun when we do it. But yeah, check us out. Leave comments, like, subscribe, follow at Fresh Set Podcast on YouTube, on X, on Instagram, on TikTok, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your podcasts, wherever you can find us. Again, like, subscribe, comment, share it. And yeah, hopefully you enjoyed, and join us next week. Grab a fresh set.